Recently I made a video on Heartseeker and showed off how strong it can be with Neith and her ultimate dealing over 1200 damage in a normal game and not some artificial scenario. However, a lot of you asked about a more analytical perspective on Heartseeker, looking into the numbers behind it a little bit to see how strong it really is. So that's what we're going to do today. For those of you who are not aware yet, the reason why this is relevant again is because Heartseeker got moved to another item tree. It's now in the same tree as Katana and Hydra, the Morningstar tree. And with this moving of the item, there were also some changes to the stats. It's still 2300 gold, it has 30 physical power and 10 physical penetration, that remains the same. However, it gets an extra 200 flat mana plus 7 MP5, and as its passive, every successful basic attack gives you 1 stack. At 5 stacks, your next ability deals bonus damage equal to 80% of your physical power to the first enemy guard hit and restores 10% of your maximum mana. So Heartseeker is now a hybrid item between a high damage, high burst ability based item, but also a mana sustain item. And it fulfills this niche very well. In all honesty, the mana part, or especially the MP5, doesn't even seem all too necessary to me. The flat mana still has the benefit of allowing you to scale a little bit higher with your Transcendence too, but overall I think this item shouldn't really be built without Transcendence in almost any situation, on Hunters at least. That is due to the fact that it scales with your physical power. And what's the best item to get a lot of physical power? Transcendence. So I've experimented with this in earlier or later stages of the game, and the conclusion has pretty much always been the same for me. The best slot for this item for an ability-based hunter is the 3rd or 4th if you build a starter item. Your first finished item should be Transcendence or Boots, and then the other one, whichever you haven't finished first. If you want to, you can put a Hunter's Blessing or a Mage's Blessing up front, but the important part here is that you finish Transcendence before you go into Heartseeker and you get your Boots online so you have the extra mobility as well. That way you will have a lot of power that already front loads on the passive, and you also get a lot more clear that way. Because that's one of the bigger issues of Heartseeker, that the power itself is not that strong on the item compared to, say, Transcendence. So the clear will not drastically increase, and there's not much of a benefit in having it all too early when the passive proc does significantly less. There are some outliers where this rule doesn't necessarily have to apply, guards that can clear so easily that they're really not depending on that power at all, or guards that have a super easy time proccing Heartseeker, like for example Medusa with her cone spray. But in either situation, I felt Transcendence as a basis, with a little bit of cooldown reduction as well, felt better to me personally. There were a few things that I was interested though aside of just that. On one hand, I wanted to see which build would lead to the highest ability damage overall when we follow this pattern of having Transcendence plus Warrior Tabai plus Heartseeker, what you could add to that. And on the other hand, I wanted to figure out if there are any items, for example, with very high power that can somehow in situations end up actually giving you more damage output than Heartseeker would. Let's first talk about a core build. Now, what you want to have obviously is a lot of power and a lot of penetration ideally, as well as at least some attack speed to get some more basics off, because you're still a hunter after all. And there are a few items that offer exactly that. So your base is Transcendence, Warrior Tabai, and Heartseeker. You could also go for Ninja Tabai here if you really want a little bit more of attack speed, but I like the early aggression and pressure that comes with Warrior Tabai here and would maybe swap that out late game, but you would sacrifice some damage. The next item that I would build is the Crusher. The Crusher is again an item that has a little bit of flat penetration. It also has a fair bit of power. It also has a passive that once again scales off your own power, and it also comes with a little bit of attack speed, so it's the perfect mix in this situation. Those are exactly the stats you want to have to not only enhance your ability damage further, but also get a little bit in the direction of attack speed. Another item that could be put here is Brawler's Beatstick. It would give you slightly more ability damage due to the higher power, while they both have their 15 penetration, which is very strong. This one I would recommend if you're really not after the slightest bit of attack speed, or you're looking to get anti-heal for the opponents. However, you could also simply swap it out for the 6th slot, so that doesn't matter all too much here, we'll get into that. And then the other item that you will kind of have to build is a necessary evil here, and that is Titan's Bane. Now, you could get away without Titan's Bane if you just want purely raw power against squishies and not anything against tanks at all, anything against anyone building some defense, but I would highly advise against it. It's just not how it should work when you're playing an ADC, because you will sooner or later have to deal some damage to the tanks as well. If you're a hunter in middle lane and you have maybe a tank shredder in solo and in duo, then this is something worth considering, but this is a very niche case. So in almost any build, you will have to have Titan's Bane, and that does not only go for Conquest. As long as the enemies have any tanks or any frontliners, it's kind of necessary. At this point, our build has a lot of damage, a lot of power, a lot of penetration already, and it's actually not too expensive. It's not the cheapest build for sure, but it could be worse. And as such, we can just use the last slot to spend however much we want and get whatever we want, really. Obviously, you could consider an Odysseus bow here. This would not contribute to your ability damage at all, but give you a massive amount of attack speed to offset the lack of that, and therefore make you more late game viable as a carry, but we're after the highest ability damage here. And for that, we have quite a few items that we can consider. The first one is what we already talked about before, Brawler's Beatstick, if we have Crusher in the 4th slot. In this case, we'll first look at the Neith ultimate. The Neith ultimate will now deal 664 damage plus 177 from Heartseeker and then a total of 50 from the Crusher. The total damage here would come down to 891. Neith ult, however, is an extremely high scaling ability with 120% scaling. So what if we added a high power item instead? The first one here would be Bloodforge. Total damage out of the ultimate, Heartseeker and Crusher damage combined would be 848. So roughly 40 less. Soul Eater, which simply has a little bit lower stats but a little bit more Kuna reduction, would come down to 834 damage. So even less damage, just a tiny bit here, tiny bit there that we're cutting off the top. Jotun's Wrath would come in at 864 damage, so actually still higher than Bloodforge. And this I think is very much worth keeping in mind, because 20% cooldown reduction for a god that's so ability dependent and ability focused build is a lot, especially when you can spam the ultimate more as well that way. So Jotun's Wrath here, even though it's a little bit less damage than Brawlers, may be of higher value if the enemy is not going for a lot of healing. For the sake of comparison, we can also use an item that has no power but penetration. This would be Asi. The total damage here is only 788. An interesting option that is not really realistic but should just be kept in mind is Malice. If Malice did not crit, and you didn't have a crit effect beforehand, the total damage would be 794. If, however, you get a crit before with Malice, and then use the ultimate quickly afterwards, then you would get 1001 damage, so the highest theoretical damage possible. Now the problem is, that is probably not going to happen, because you'd have to get the crit and then immediately go into your ult and immediately get the target and immediately fire it and immediately hit it, and I don't think that is very realistic, with the Neith ult at least. And even with other ults, it's just not that reliable that I would want to depend on it. The consistent extra damage from an item like Jotun's or Brawlers should be much higher here. But what you can see here is that even on a high power scaling ability like Neith ultimate, the penetration options win for the damage output. If we do the same thing with Medusa, who has only 100% scaling on her ultimate but 700 base damage, then things shift a little bit. Brawlers now deals a total of 1013 damage. Jotun's Wrath deals 980 damage. Bloodforge, on the other hand, comes in at 952 damage. Soul Eater has 938 damage, whereas Toxic Blade, an item that would not have any power and just penetration, actually still comes in at 948 damage. You can really see how much value penetration has over power in this outcome, because the base value here is so high. So what we can tell here is that in terms of damage output, penetration is better than power, but only by so much of a margin in most situations. However, the penetration items often come with other benefits that are more useful for you, like cooldown reduction and anti-healing, whereas items like Bloodforge or Soul Eater just have more of a use when you're looking for lifesteal or looking for very hard snowball and team fights. Whichever you prefer is up to you, but I would probably tend towards the penetration items in most situations. But could any of these replace Heartseeker? If we take the same build with Brawlers as the 6th item as our standard, and then use other items to replace Heartseeker, it looks as follows. For this one we're using Ho Ye Old, where other items really have that time to shine as it has so many hits. So if a target was hit by all hits of the Ho Ye Old with the base damage and the scaling, then Heartseeker shouldn't really make that much of a difference. And Heartseeker in the standard builds here with Brawler's Ether 6 item comes in at 1604 damage. If we're replacing Heartseeker with Soul Eater, then our damage drops down to 1373. With Bloodforge, it's 1391. With Jotun's Wrath, where you have more penetration and less power, the damage goes up to 1445. As Brawlers is already in the build, we can't use that to replace Heartseeker here. But what you can see is despite this situation being extremely favorable for items that are not Heartseeker due to the way that the ultimate works, Heartseeker still comes out on top by more than 200 damage against anything but Jotuns. And even with Jotuns, it's still a 150 damage difference. So there's really not much of a reason not to build Heartseeker and an ability-focused Hunter build. Depending on your guard, you may be able to stack your Heartseeker again once within a trade and actually get 2 procs off. This is possible for guards like Ho Ye who have enough CC, or for guards like Medusa who have an attack speed steroid as well. So the benefit from Heartseeker can only be more than in this situation, but this is already the minimum benefit that we can see. And these stats are all against the level 20 Odin, so there are targets with less defense where this damage output will be even more increased with these flat penetration items. So in conclusion, if you're going for an ability-based Hunter build, Heartseeker will increase your damage and you should very likely include it in almost any situation. Especially when playing Neith, this is such a strong item and there's really not a good reason to pass up on it in most situations. The only ones that I could think of is if you really need lifesteal, but that's so rare as an ability-based character that it should not even be mentioned. On SMITE GG, we can already see Neith performance going up drastically in the highest level of play. And Diamond Plus, we see a win rate already being at 50% now, and this is after the patches came out, many people not even having caught onto these changes yet. So I'm expecting her to perform even better in the future, because she is for sure the guard that makes most use of this item. Way more than Cupid, by the way. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful, gave you a bit of a deeper look into the item. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.